The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Quentin Forrester rode into Eureka Springs, Arkansas, his worn leather boots caked with the dust of 1,000 miles. Every creak of his saddle told a story he'd rather forget. Every scar on his sun-weathered hands a reminder of debts paid in lead and blood. His shadow stretched long across the main street as townsfolk hurried indoors, mothers pulling children close at the sight of the stranger with eyes that had seen too much of this harsh world. Quentin hadn't planned on stopping in Eureka Springs. No place had been home since that terrible night in '79, and he preferred it that way. Easier to leave no trace when you never put down roots. But his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Ghost, had thrown a shoe, and the mountain roads of the Ozarks were no place for a lame mount. The local smithy was closed for the evening, so Quentin headed for the Red Mountain Saloon, the only building on the dusty street still alive with light and raucous laughter. He hitched Ghost outside, patting the horse's neck with a gentleness that contradicted his formidable appearance. "Just the night, old friend," he whispered. "Then we ride on." The saloon fell quiet as Quentin pushed through the batwing doors, his spurs announcing each step with a soft jingle. He stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders shaped by years of hard work and harder fights. A faded cavalry hat shadowed piercing blue eyes, and a week's growth of beard couldn't hide the jagged scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. The piano player resumed a halting tune as Quentin made his way to the bar. The bartender, a burly man with a walrus mustache, eyed him warily. "Whiskey," Quentin said, his voice rough as gravel. "And information on the blacksmith." "2 bits for the whiskey," the bartender replied, setting down a glass and pouring a generous measure. "Information's free. Harvey's shop opens at sunrise. Best smith between here and Fort Smith." Quentin nodded his thanks and turned to survey the room, leaning his back against the bar. Old habits died hard. Always know your exits, count the men who might be trouble, spot the ones carrying hidden weapons. The saloon was typical card players, working girls, a few locals drowning the day's troubles. Then he saw her. She stood at the far end of the bar, arranging glasses on a tray. Not a saloon girl, judging by her modest dress, but something in the way she carried herself caught his attention. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple knot, revealing a graceful neck and determined profile. When she turned and met his gaze, Quentin felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a jolt of recognition, though he was certain they'd never met. The woman approached, her tray now empty, and smiled. It was a genuine smile, not the practiced kind he usually encountered in establishments like this. "You look like you've come a long way," she said. "Far enough," Quentin replied, instinctively guarded. "I'm Ruby Calloway," she offered, extending a slender hand. "I help my uncle run this place." Quentin hesitated before taking her hand. "Quentin Forrester." "Well, Mr. Forrester, are you passing through or staying a while, just until morning? Horse needs attention." Ruby nodded, seeming to study him with intelligent green eyes that missed little. "You should try the stew. My uncle makes it fresh daily, and you look like you could use a proper meal." Before Quentin could respond, a commotion erupted at one of the card tables. A red-faced man in a banker's suit stood abruptly, pointing an accusatory finger at his opponent. "You're cheating, McCoy. I saw you palm that card." The accused, a lean, hawk-faced man, remained seated, a dangerous smile playing at his lips. "Careful with those accusations, Whitaker. Men have died for less." Quentin tensed, recognizing the prelude to violence. Ruby stepped forward, but he gently moved her behind him as McCoy rose, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. "Gentlemen," Quentin said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Seems like a simple misunderstanding. Perhaps it's time to call it a night." McCoy's cold eyes flicked to Quentin. "Who asked you, stranger?" "Nobody," Quentin admitted. "But I'd hate to see this lady's floor messed up with blood." The saloon had gone silent again. McCoy measured Quentin, noting his stance and the confident way he stood without reaching for his own weapon. Something in that assessment made the card player reconsider. "Another time, Whitaker," McCoy muttered, collecting his winnings and heading for the door. "Watch yourself, stranger. This town isn't as welcoming as it pretends to be." After McCoy departed, the tension in the room gradually dissolved. The banker slumped back into his chair, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Ruby touched Quentin's arm lightly. "Thank you. McCoy's been trouble ever since he rode in last month." Quentin merely nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "About that stew," she smiled again, and this time Quentin allowed himself to notice how it transformed her face, bringing warmth to features already striking in their quiet beauty. "Coming right up, Mr. Forrester." The stew was indeed excellent venison, potatoes and wild onions in a rich broth that reminded Quentin of meals long forgotten. He ate at a corner table, his back to the wall, watching the saloon's patrons and occasionally meeting Ruby's gaze as she moved efficiently among the tables. Later, when most patrons had left and Ruby's uncle, a jovial man named Ezekiel with an impressive beard, was cleaning up, she approached Quentin's table again. "Uncle Zeke keeps rooms upstairs for travelers," she said. "Clean sheets, no bugs. 2 bits for the night." Quentin had planned to sleep in the livery with Ghost, as he usually did. Safer that way. But weariness weighed on him, and something about Ruby's presence eased the constant vigilance he'd maintained for years. "Much obliged," he said, placing coins on the table. Ruby showed him to a small but tidy room at the end of the hallway. "Breakfast at sunrise," she said, handing him the key. "Sleep well, Mr. Forrester." Quentin waited until her footsteps had retreated down the hallway before entering the room. He checked the window, a clear drop to an alley below, good for a quick exit if needed. He placed his revolver under his pillow and sat on the edge of the bed, removing his boots. For the first time in countless nights, his last thought before sleep wasn't of the dead men who haunted his dreams, but of a pair of green eyes and a smile that seemed to see right through him. Dawn broke clear and cool, with mist rising from the surrounding Ozark hills. Quentin was already awake, having slept better than expected. He made his way downstairs to find Ruby alone in the saloon, setting out coffee and plates of eggs and biscuits. "You're an early riser," she remarked, pouring him a cup of coffee so strong it nearly stood the spoon upright. "Old habit," Quentin replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "Army?" she asked with that perceptive look again. Quentin paused. "For a time, how did you know the way you carry yourself?" "My father was cavalry, served under Custer before." She trailed off. "Before Little Bighorn," Quentin finished quietly. Ruby nodded. "He wasn't there that day, transferred to Fort Smith the year before, but he lost many friends." Quentin drank his coffee in silence. The cavalry had been part of his life, but not the part that woke him sweating in the night. After breakfast, Quentin thanked Ruby and headed for the blacksmith shop. Harvey, a giant of a man with arms like tree trunks, had Ghost's shoe replaced by mid-morning. As Quentin paid him, the smith mentioned a trail heading west out of town. "If you're looking to avoid trouble," Harvey said meaningfully, "there's a pass through the hills that bypasses the main road. McCoy and his boys have been known to watch the crossroads." Quentin considered this. McCoy causing problems for more than just card players. Harvey glanced around before speaking lower. "Started small. Road taxes, he called them, then protection fees for businesses. Now folks are afraid. Sheriffs no help, either paid off or too scared." This wasn't Quentin's problem. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved only led to more graves. Still, he found himself asking, this Ruby Calloway and her uncle, they having trouble with McCoy? Harvey's expression darkened. McCoy's had his eye on their place since he got here. Prime location on Main Street. Miss Ruby's been standing firm, but... He shrugged, the implications clear. Quentin led Ghost back toward the saloon, his plans to ride out immediately now uncertain. The town was beginning to stir with daily activity, shopkeepers opening their doors, wagons delivering goods, children running toward the small schoolhouse at the end of the street. As he approached the Red Mountain, he saw 3 men lounging outside. McCoy was at the center, flanked by 2 rough-looking companions. They were blocking the entrance, and through the window, Quentin could see Ruby inside, her posture tense as she faced them. Quentin tied Ghost to a nearby post and approached, his stride unhurried but purposeful. "Don't think you understand the opportunity I'm offering," McCoy was saying. "This town is changing. You can either change with it or what?" McCoy, Quentin interrupted, stopping a few paces away. McCoy turned slowly, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Well, if it isn't the chivalrous stranger, I was just having a business discussion with Miss Calloway." "Looks finished to me," Quentin said. One of McCoy's men, a burly fellow with a badly broken nose, stepped forward. "This ain't your concern, mister." "Suppose it is now," Quentin replied evenly. McCoy studied Quentin with new interest. "You know, you look familiar. Have we crossed paths before?" "I doubt it." "No, I'm certain." McCoy snapped his fingers. "Kansas, Dodge City maybe, or was it Wichita?" His eyes narrowed. "You rode with Marshal Adams, didn't you?" Quentin kept his expression neutral, but inwardly he cursed. He'd hoped that part of his past was buried deep enough. "You've mistaken me for someone else," he said flatly. McCoy's smile widened. "I don't think so. Boys, we're in the presence of a genuine lawman, or former lawman, I should say." "There was some trouble, wasn't there? Something about a raid gone wrong." Quentin's hand twitched slightly, an involuntary reaction that McCoy didn't miss. "Hit a nerve, did I?" McCoy taunted. "Well, no matter. Your badge days are over, and this is my town now." He gestured to his men, and they reluctantly backed off. "We'll continue our discussion another time, Miss Calloway. Think carefully about my offer." With that, McCoy and his men sauntered away, their message delivered. Ruby stood in the doorway, watching them go before turning to Quentin. "What was that about? Do you know him?" "No," Quentin said, "but he seems to think he knows me." Ruby looked skeptical but didn't press. "I thought you'd be gone by now." "So did I," Quentin admitted. He found himself unexpectedly reluctant to leave. "Your blacksmith says McCoy's been causing problems for businesses around town." "He wants to buy us out," Ruby confirmed. "Says he's going to turn Eureka Springs into a modern establishment with gambling and other entertainments." She crossed her arms. "This was my parents' place. I'm not selling it to a man like that." Quentin respected her determination, but he'd seen what happened to those who stood against men like McCoy. "He won't take no for long." "Are you suggesting I give in?" Ruby challenged. "I'm suggesting you be careful," Quentin said. "Men like that don't play by rules." Ruby's green eyes flashed. "Neither do I when necessary." She regarded him thoughtfully. "Were you really a marshal?" Quentin hesitated, then nodded once. "A lifetime ago." "And what are you now?" she asked. "Just passing through," he said, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. Ruby seemed about to say more when a commotion down the street drew their attention. A wagon had pulled up outside the general store, and a woman was climbing down, assisted by the storekeeper. Even from a distance, Quentin could see she was heavily pregnant. "That's Sarah Miller," Ruby explained. "Her husband's the doctor, but he's been called to a homestead outside town. Baby's not due for weeks yet." As if to contradict her words, the woman suddenly doubled over, clutching her belly. The storekeeper looked around frantically, and Ruby was already moving toward them. "She needs help," Ruby called over her shoulder to Quentin. Without thinking, Quentin followed. By the time they reached the woman, she was breathing heavily, leaning against the wagon. "Ruby," she gasped. "The baby, it's coming early." "Let's get you inside," Ruby said calmly, supporting Sarah with a steady arm. "Mr. Forrester, could you help us?" Quentin carefully lifted Sarah, mindful of her condition, and carried her into the store where the shopkeeper hastily cleared a space in the back room. Ruby took command of the situation, sending the shopkeeper for clean linens and hot water. "Have you delivered a baby before?" Quentin asked quietly as they made Sarah comfortable. "3," Ruby replied, rolling up her sleeves. "On my parents' farm before we moved to town." "Have you?" Quentin had seen birth and death in equal measure during his years on the frontier. Once or twice. For the next few hours, they worked together to help Sarah through her labor. Ruby's calm competence impressed Quentin, as did her gentle reassurance to the frightened mother-to-be. When complications arose, the baby was positioned wrong. Ruby didn't panic. She asked Quentin to support Sarah while she skillfully turned the infant. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's cries gave way to the wailing of a healthy baby boy. Ruby cleaned and swaddled the infant while Quentin helped make Sarah comfortable. When Dr. Miller finally arrived, breathless and worried, he found his wife resting peacefully with their son in her arms. "I don't know how to thank you both," the doctor said, emotion making his voice rough. "If you hadn't been there." "Ruby did the real work," Quentin said, uncomfortable with gratitude as always. Outside the general store, as the excitement died down and townsfolk dispersed, Ruby and Quentin walked slowly back toward the saloon. "You're good in a crisis," Ruby observed. "Most men would have fled at the first sign of childbirth." "Most men are fools," Quentin replied, then added more softly, "You've got skilled hands and a steady heart, Miss Calloway." Ruby looked pleased at the compliment. "So do you, Mr. Forrester." She glanced at him sideways. "For someone just passing through, you seem to get involved quite easily." Quentin had no response to that. It was true, and it troubled him. Getting involved meant putting down roots, however temporary. Roots could be traced. As they reached the saloon, Ezekiel burst out the door, his face flushed with anger. "Ruby, McCoy's men were here again. They broke bottles, threatened to return tonight." Ruby's face paled. "Uncle Zeke, are you hurt?" "Just my pride," the older man huffed. "But I'm worried, Ruby. This is escalating." Quentin surveyed the interior of the saloon. Several tables were overturned and broken glass littered the floor behind the bar. A warning clear as day. "I'm going to the sheriff," Ruby declared. Ezekiel shook his head. "Sheriff Daniels won't help. He told me this morning to consider McCoy's offer before things get worse." "So he is in McCoy's pocket," Quentin muttered. Ruby turned to him, a determined set to her jaw. "Will you stay? Just until we sort this out. I'll pay you, of course." "I'm not for hire," Quentin said reflexively. "I'm not asking to hire a gun," Ruby replied. "I'm asking for help from a former lawman who still remembers what justice looks like." Her words struck deeper than she could know. Justice. It had been so long since Quentin believed in such a thing. His badge had been a shield until the day it became a burden too heavy to bear. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly, "or who you're asking it of." Ruby stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. "I see a man running from something. That much is clear. But I also see a man who still steps in when others are in trouble. Whatever you're running from, Mr. Forrester, it hasn't changed who you are at heart." Quentin felt a crack forming in the armor he'd built around himself. This woman saw too much. "I'll stay a few days," he finally said. "Help you secure the place, but then I'm moving on." Relief washed over Ruby's face. Thank you. That's all I ask. That evening, Quentin helped Ezekiel repair the damage to the saloon. As they worked, the older man shared stories of Eureka Springs before McCoy's arrival, a growing town known for its healing springs, attracting visitors from as far as St. Louis and New Orleans. This place was special to my sister and her husband, Ezekiel explained. Ruby's parents. They built it from nothing after the war, made it respectable. A place for travelers and townsfolk alike. He sighed, hammering a nail into a repaired chair. Sarah, Ruby's mother, died of fever 5 years back. Jacob followed a year later, some say of a broken heart. And Ruby stayed on, Quentin observed, sweeping up broken glass. Ezekiel nodded. Could have married well. Had offers from suitable men in Fort Smith and even Little Rock. But this place, this town, it's in her blood. Stubborn as her father, that girl. Quentin found himself smiling slightly. I believe that. By nightfall, the saloon was restored and open for business, though the crowd was thinner than the previous evening. Word of McCoy's visit had spread, and many townsfolk were staying home, avoiding potential trouble. Ruby moved among the tables with her usual grace, but Quentin noted the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she watched the door. He'd positioned himself at a table with a clear view of both entrances, his revolver within easy reach beneath his coat. Around 9 o'clock, the batwing doors swung open, and conversation died as McCoy entered, flanked by 4 men this time. He surveyed the room with the satisfied air of a man who enjoyed the fear his presence inspired. "Evening, folks," he called cheerfully. "Don't let us interrupt your revelry." His eyes landed on Quentin. "Still here, Marshal. I thought perhaps our little chat this morning might have inspired you to continue your travels." "Night's young," Quentin replied evenly. McCoy laughed and approached the bar where Ruby stood, spine straight as a ramrod. "Miss Calloway," McCoy said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "I trust you've reconsidered my offer. $1,500 is more than generous for a place that's seen better days." "This place isn't for sale," Ruby replied coldly. "Not to you, not to anyone." McCoy's smile hardened. "I admire your spirit, truly, but business is business. Eureka Springs is growing, and I've secured interests in most of Main Street already. Your establishment is the final piece I need." "For what purpose?" Ruby challenged. "To turn it into another gambling den, a brothel." "Progress, my dear," McCoy said smoothly. "This town is sitting on a gold mine with its springs. Eastern money is coming, tourists, investors. The future belongs to those who prepare for it." His voice dropped. "And those who stand in the way tend to find themselves obsolete." Quentin stood slowly, drawing everyone's attention. "Sounds like the ladies answered you twice now, McCoy." One of McCoy's men, a wiry fellow with a face like a ferret, eased his hand toward his gun. "Boss, say the word and I'll shut this interfering." "Not here, Pike," McCoy interrupted, his eyes never leaving Quentin. "Our friend the Marshal understands the delicacy of the situation. He's just playing a part he once knew well." His smile was cold as ice. "How many men have you buried, Forrester? I hear the tally at Tascosa was impressive. Women and children too, if the stories are true." Quentin felt the blood drain from his face. Tascosa. The name alone was enough to bring back the screams, the smoke, the terrible silence after. "That's a lie," he managed, though his throat had gone dry. McCoy raised an eyebrow. "Is it? Perhaps Miss Calloway should hear the full story before she puts her trust in a man with such history." Ruby looked between them, confusion and concern mingling on her face. "Whatever you're implying, Mr. McCoy, I suggest you leave. Now." McCoy held Quentin's gaze a moment longer, then shrugged. "As you wish, but my offer expires tomorrow. After that, well." He glanced meaningfully around the saloon. "Accidents happen. Buildings burn. especially wooden ones. With that parting threat, McCoy and his men departed, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Ruby approached Quentin, who had remained frozen in place. What was he talking about? Tascosa. Quentin couldn't meet her eyes. Nothing that matters now. It clearly matters to you, she countered. And if McCoy is using it against you, it matters to me too. The few remaining patrons were watching them with undisguised interest. Quentin shook his head. Not here. Later, after the saloon closed and Ezekiel had gone upstairs to bed, Ruby found Quentin sitting alone in the darkened room, a barely touched whiskey before him. She sat across from him, her face soft in the light of the single lamp she'd brought. "You don't have to tell me," she said quietly. "But I think perhaps you need to tell someone." Quentin stared into his glass. The amber liquid reflected the lamplight like the flames that had consumed Tascosa. For years, he'd carried the weight of that night alone, letting it drive him from place to place, never staying long enough for questions to arise. "I was a deputy U.S. Marshal out of Fort Smith," he began, his voice low. "Under Judge Parker. Hanging judge, they called him. But he believed in the law, in bringing order to the territories." Ruby nodded. Judge Isaac Parker was well known throughout the region for his strict adherence to justice. In '79, we got word of a gang operating out of Tascosa, in the Texas Panhandle. Rustlers, mostly, but they'd killed a family near the Canadian River. Marshall sent me and 4 others to bring them in. Quentin took a long breath. "We tracked them to a settlement outside town. Informants said they'd be there, just the gang, no one else." Ruby waited patiently as Quentin gathered himself to continue. "It was night. No moon. We surrounded the buildings, called for surrender." His hand tightened around the glass. "They opened fire from the windows. We returned it. Someone's lantern got hit, oil spilled. The fire spread so fast." He fell silent, the memories washing over him in vivid detail, the crackle of flames, the choking smoke, the screams. "When it was over, we found them the gang members we'd come for, but also—" He closed his eyes briefly. "Women, children, an entire family who'd had nothing to do with the gang. Just in the wrong place." "It was an accident," Ruby said softly. "You couldn't have known." "Our informant sold us out," Quentin continued as if he hadn't heard her. "He'd been working with the gang all along, set us up to hit innocent people. By the time we realized, it was too late. 12 dead, including 3 children. And the informant found him 2 weeks later in a saloon in Dodge City. He resisted arrest." Quentin's voice was flat. "I made sure he wouldn't lie to anyone else." Ruby reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "That's why you left the marshals." Quentin nodded. "Judge Parker cleared us officially, said we'd acted on bad information, that the fault lay with the informant, but I knew better. I should have verified the information, should have approached differently." He finally met her eyes. "I resigned my badge the next day. Been riding ever since, trying to outrun what happened, but McCoy's right, some things follow you." "Is that why you help people?" Ruby asked. "To atone?" The question startled him. He'd never thought of his occasional interventions that way, but perhaps she was right. Every woman safely escorted through dangerous territory, every dispute diffused without bloodshed, small payments against an insurmountable debt. "Maybe," he admitted, "but it never feels like enough." Ruby's hand remained on his, warm and steady. "The past shapes us, Mr. Forrester, but it doesn't have to define us. What matters is who you choose to be now." Quentin looked at her, really looked at her. In the soft lamplight, her features were gentle yet strong, her eyes compassionate without pity. He realized with a jolt that it had been years since anyone had looked at him and seen a man rather than a weapon or a threat. "McCoy knows about Tascosa," he said. "That means he has connections." "Possibly law connections. Makes him more dangerous than I thought." Ruby withdrew her hand, her expression turning practical. "Then we need a plan. McCoy won't stop with threats. If he's determined to get this place, he'll use whatever means necessary." "You could sell," Quentin suggested, though he already knew her answer. "Never," she said firmly. "This isn't just about land or a building. It's about standing up to men who think they can take whatever they want through intimidation and violence." She stood, gathering her resolve. "I won't be the one who surrenders this town to a man like McCoy." As she turned to go, Quentin found himself speaking again. "Ruby." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it felt both foreign and natural on his tongue. "You asked who I am now. Truth is, I don't rightly know any more. But I do know I won't let what happened in Tascosa happen here." Ruby's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Then let me light the way, Mr. Forrester. Sometimes we all need someone to help us see the path forward." With those words, she left him to his thoughts, which for once were not solely of the past, but tentatively reaching toward a future he hadn't dared imagine. The next morning, Quentin rose early and made a careful inspection of the saloon and its surroundings, noting vulnerabilities and potential defensive positions. If McCoy made good on his threat, they needed to be prepared. Ruby found him examining the back entrance, looking for weak spots. "Too many to count," Quentin replied honestly. "Building this old, it's mostly wood and hope." "Cheerful assessment," she remarked, but her smile acknowledged the truth of it. "I've been thinking about McCoy's deadline. We should make a show of strength today, let him know we're not intimidated." Quentin frowned. Confrontation might be exactly what he wants. "Not confrontation," Ruby clarified. "Visibility. The town's market day. Everyone will be on Main Street if McCoy's men try anything with so many witnesses." Quentin understood her strategy. Public pressure could be a powerful deterrent, even for men like McCoy. "Worth a try," he conceded. "But I'll stay close." The market transformed Eureka Springs' main thoroughfare into a bustling scene of commerce and socializing. Farmers from outlying homesteads brought produce and livestock. Merchants displayed wares from as far as Little Rock, and townsfolk gathered to trade news as much as goods. Ruby set up a small table outside the saloon, offering coffee and her uncle's fresh baked bread to passers-by. The gesture was well received, and soon a steady stream of people were stopping to chat, many expressing concern about McCoy's recent activities in town. "He raised Mr. Peterson's rent on the mercantile," confided Mrs. Holloway, the milliner's wife. "Doubled it overnight. Said it was the going rate for premium locations." "And the liveries next," added Josiah Turner, the elderly stablemaster. "Got a letter yesterday saying the property's been sold to McCoy's company. Haven't even seen a penny, but he claims it's all legal-like." Quentin listened to these accounts with growing concern. McCoy wasn't just targeting the saloon, he was systematically taking control of the entire town. Such ambitious land grabbing suggested resources and connections beyond a simple card sharp and bully. As midday approached, Quentin spotted McCoy and 3 of his men making their way through the market. The crowd parted before them, conversations dying as they passed. McCoy nodded pleasantly to townspeople, playing the role of respectable businessman, but his eyes hardened when he saw Ruby's impromptu gathering. "Miss Calloway," he called, approaching her table. "What a delightful idea, breaking bread with the community." Ruby stood her ground, smile firmly in place. "Market day tradition, Mr. McCoy. My mother started it years ago." "Charming," McCoy said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I wonder, have you shared the news with your friends and neighbors?" "What news would that be?" Ruby asked coolly. "Why, about the saloon's imminent renovation, of course." McCoy raised his voice slightly, ensuring others could hear. The Red Mountain will soon become the grand centerpiece of the new Eureka Springs, a proper hotel and gaming establishment that will attract visitors from across the country. Murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. McCoy continued, warming to his audience. Progress is coming, friends. The springs that give our town its name are a natural treasure. With proper development, hotels, bathing houses, entertainment, Eureka Springs could rival Hot Springs itself. He gestured expansively. Imagine the prosperity, the opportunities for all. Quentin noted with concern that some townsfolk were nodding, swayed by McCoy's vision. The man was clever, appealing to both greed and civic pride. A lovely picture, Ruby replied. But the Red Mountain isn't part of your plans, Mr. McCoy. As I've told you repeatedly, it's not for sale. McCoy's smile didn't falter. Every building has its price, Miss Calloway. Every person, too. His gaze flicked briefly to Quentin. Even those who believe themselves beyond such worldly concerns. Is that a threat? Quentin asked quietly. Merely an observation, McCoy replied smoothly. Business, like life, follows natural laws. The strong prosper, the weak accommodate. He tipped his hat to Ruby. I look forward to our continued discussions. My offer remains open until sundown. As McCoy and his men moved on, the crowd slowly dispersed, many casting uncertain glances toward Ruby. Quentin stepped closer to her. He's good, he admitted grudgingly. Knows how to work a crowd. He's offering them a dream, Ruby said. People want to believe in a better future. Even if it's built on lies and intimidation, Ruby shook her head. Most don't see that part. They see opportunity, progress. She began gathering the cups from her table. We need to find out more about McCoy, where he came from, who's backing him. I'll ask around, Quentin offered. Someone in town must know something. While Ruby returned to the saloon, Quentin made his way toward the telegraph office. The operator, a thin, nervous man named Collins, looked up sharply when Quentin entered. Need to send a wire to Fort Smith, Quentin said. Marshal's office, Collins hesitated. Telegraph lines down, sir. Storm last week took out poles north of here, Quentin frowned. When will it be repaired? Hard to say. Week, maybe 2. Collins wouldn't meet his eyes. If it's urgent, there's a working line in Berryville, 20 miles east. As Quentin turned to leave, Collins called after him in a lowered voice. Sir, if you're asking about McCoy, be careful. Man's got friends in unexpected places. The warning confirmed Quentin's suspicions. He spent the next few hours discreetly questioning townsfolk about McCoy, piecing together the man's activities since arriving in Eureka Springs 2 months earlier. The pattern was clear. McCoy had begun by establishing himself as a wealthy investor, spending freely at local businesses and discussing ambitious development plans. Then came property acquisitions, first willing sellers, then increasing pressure on holdouts. The saloon, situated prominently on Main Street, was apparently the final piece of his plan. By late afternoon, Quentin had gathered enough information to be deeply concerned. He returned to the Red Mountain to find Ruby and Ezekiel preparing for the evening crowd. McCoy's not working alone, Quentin reported. Blacksmith says he arrived with letters of introduction from a judge in Little Rock. Been flashing documents with official seals, property transfers, development permits. Ezekiel frowned. Sounds like he's got the law on his side. Or a convincing appearance of it, Quentin countered. Telegraph's conveniently down. Can't verify anything. Ruby set down the glasses she was arranging. What are you thinking? I'm thinking there's more to McCoy than a land grab in a small town, Quentin said. This level of organization, the legal documentation, the timing with the telegraph being down, it's too neat. You think it's a swindle, Ruby realized. He's creating the impression of legitimate business to pressure people into selling, then he'll disappear with the money. Quentin nodded. It's happened before in boomtowns. Confidence men work their way through a region, moving on before authorities catch up. But how do we prove it? Ezekiel asked. If his papers look legal. We need to buy time, Quentin said. Stall him until we can get word to Fort Smith. The sun was low on the horizon now, McCoy's deadline approaching. Ruby straightened her shoulders, determination written across her features. I have an idea, she said, but you're not going to like it. An hour later, as twilight deepened over Eureka Springs, McCoy arrived at the Red Mountain with his second in command, the man called Pike. They found Ruby waiting for them at a table, ledgers and papers spread before her. Mr. McCoy, she greeted him with professional courtesy. Thank you for coming. McCoy glanced around, noting the empty saloon. Closing early tonight, Miss Calloway. I wanted privacy for our discussion, Ruby replied. Please sit. McCoy exchanged a satisfied look with Pike before settling into a chair. I'm pleased you've reconsidered my offer. I'm considering it, Ruby corrected, but I need to understand exactly what you're proposing. The full scope of your development plans, your financial backing, the timeline. McCoy's smile dimmed slightly. The details are straightforward. I purchase the property, you vacate within 30 days, and renovation begins immediately. And your investors, Ruby pressed. I'd like to know who I'm really dealing with. I represent a consortium, McCoy said dismissively. Eastern gentlemen of means who prefer to remain anonymous until deals are finalized. Ruby nodded, making notes. And the legal framework. I understand you've acquired several properties recently. I'd like to see examples of the transfer documents, ensure everything is properly structured. Quentin, watching from the shadows of the stairwell, had to admire Ruby's strategy. She was probing for inconsistencies while buying time. McCoy's eyes narrowed. Miss Calloway, while I appreciate thoroughness, my patience has limits. My offer of $1,500 expires at sundown, which, he checked his pocket watch, has now passed. Then let me counter, Ruby said calmly. $1,800, but I require 2 weeks to review all documentation and consult my own legal advisor in Fort Smith. McCoy's expression hardened. This sudden interest in legalities feels like a delaying tactic. Not at all, Ruby assured him. It's simple business sense. Surely your Eastern investors would expect the same diligence. A flash of annoyance crossed McCoy's face before he controlled it. Very well. $1,800 it is. I'll have the papers drawn up tomorrow, but no more than 3 days for your review. 1 week, Ruby countered. 5 days, McCoy said firmly. And I'll need a gesture of good faith, a signed letter of intent tonight. Ruby hesitated, then nodded. I'll draft one now. As she began writing, the saloon doors opened, and Quentin tensed as 2 more of McCoy's men entered. One whispered something to Pike, who then leaned close to McCoy's ear. McCoy's expression darkened immediately. Interesting development, Miss Calloway, he said, his voice gone cold. It seems your former lawman friend has been asking pointed questions about me all over town, even attempted to send a telegraph to Fort Smith. Ruby's pen paused, but her face revealed nothing. Mr. Forrester is naturally protective. He's concerned about my interests. Is that all? McCoy stood slowly. Or perhaps he's trying to interfere with legitimate business, maybe even attempting to revive his failed career by manufacturing suspicions, he gestured, and his men moved to block the exits. Quentin stepped out from the shadows, hand resting near his holstered revolver. This doesn't need to get complicated, McCoy, he said. McCoy's laugh was sharp. It's already complicated, Marshal. You see, I know exactly who you are. Quentin Forrester, Deputy U.S. Marshal until 1879, wanted for questioning in the murder of an informant named Lyle Jenkins in Dodge City. Quentin's blood ran cold. Jenkins had indeed died by his hand, but only after drawing first during an attempted arrest. It had been ruled a justified shooting. "That's a lie," Quentin said. "Jenkins was wanted for murder and died resisting arrest." "Not according to sworn testimony I've seen," McCoy replied. "Amazing what money can buy in terms of witnesses. The story has you gunning him down in cold blood, vengeful over the Tascosa incident." Ruby stood, alarm clear on her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your protector is himself a fugitive," McCoy said. "And I have a wire ready to send to Kansas authorities the moment he becomes a problem." He turned back to Quentin. "Nothing personal, Forrester, just business." Quentin measured the distance to McCoy's men, calculating odds that grew worse by the second. If McCoy truly had fabricated evidence against him in Kansas, a confrontation now would only end with Quentin in chains or dead. "You're bluffing," Ruby said suddenly. "The telegraph is down." "Everyone in town knows it," McCoy smiled thinly. "Is it? Or did Mr. Collins simply tell you that on my instructions?" He shrugged at their expressions. "As I said, amazing what money can buy, including the exclusive use of communication lines." The realization hit Quentin hard. They'd been outmaneuvered from the start. "What do you want, McCoy?" he asked bluntly. "For you to ride out tonight," McCoy replied, "far and fast. Meanwhile, Miss Calloway will sign the transfer documents I've already prepared." He produced papers from his coat. "The price is now $1,200. Consider the reduction a consequence of your meddling." Ruby's face flushed with anger. "This is extortion." "This is business," McCoy corrected, "conducted with appropriate leverage." Quentin met Ruby's eyes across the room, seeing in them the same fierce determination he'd admired since meeting her. In that silent exchange, a decision was made. "I need to collect my things," Quentin said, his voice hollow with apparent defeat. McCoy nodded. "Pike, accompany the marshal. Ensure he only takes what's his." As Pike followed Quentin upstairs, Ruby faced McCoy across the table. "You won't get away with this." "My dear," McCoy replied condescendingly, "I already have. Eureka Springs is merely one step in a much larger plan. By this time next year, I'll control development rights to half the medicinal springs in this region." He pushed the papers toward her. "Now sign." Upstairs, Pike watched as Quentin gathered his meager possessions, stuffing them into saddlebags. "Nothing personal," Pike offered. "Boss says you were good once. Shame how things turned out at Tascosa." Quentin's movements slowed. "You know about Tascosa?" Pike shrugged. "Boss knows everything about everyone he deals with, makes his living being prepared." "And what does he know about you?" Quentin asked casually, reaching for his coat hanging on a wall peg. "Enough to trust me with handling troublemakers," Pike said with a smirk, hand resting on his holstered revolver. Quentin nodded thoughtfully, then in one fluid motion swung the heavy coat at Pike's face. The man reacted instinctively, raising his arms to block the distraction exactly as Quentin had anticipated. Before Pike could recover, Quentin closed the distance between them and delivered a precise strike to the man's throat, followed by a knee to the stomach that doubled him over. Pike dropped to the floor, gasping for air. Quentin quickly bound and gagged him with strips torn from a bed sheet, then took Pike's revolver and knife. "Nothing personal," Quentin muttered, then crept to the hallway, listening for sounds of alarm from below. He could hear Ruby's voice, still calm despite the circumstances, apparently reviewing McCoy's documents with deliberate slowness. Good woman, buying time without even knowing his plan. Moving silently, Quentin made his way to the back stairs that led to the kitchen. He needed to even the odds before confronting McCoy directly. Downstairs, Ruby was stalling as effectively as she could. This clause about existing inventory seems vague, she said, pointing to a paragraph. And what exactly does immediate surrender of premises entail? McCoy's patience was clearly wearing thin. It means you take your personal effects and leave, tonight. The business and building become mine upon signing. And my uncle, Ruby asked. He lives here. Not anymore, McCoy said flatly. Ruby glanced toward the stairs, wondering what was taking so long upstairs. Ezekiel had slipped out the back earlier, supposedly to fetch the town's attorney, but she knew he was really gathering loyal townspeople who might stand with them. Where's Pike? One of McCoy's men asked suddenly, looking toward the stairs. McCoy frowned. Check on him, he ordered the man, and find out what's keeping the back door banged open. And Ezekiel entered, followed by Harvey the blacksmith and several other men Ruby recognized as longtime customers and friends. Evening, McCoy, Ezekiel said grimly. Heard you were forcing my niece to sell. Thought we might discuss that as a community. McCoy's remaining man drew his weapon, but McCoy himself remained calm. Put that away, Delaney. We're conducting business here, not starting a war. He turned to the newcomers. Gentlemen, this is a private transaction. I suggest it's fraud, came Quentin's voice as he emerged from the kitchen, Pike's revolver trained steadily on McCoy. Been looking through your saddlebags upstairs, McCoy. Found some interesting documents. Blank paper with various official seals, collection of signatures that don't belong to you, quite the forgery operation. McCoy's composure slipped for the first time. You had no right, didn't need one, Quentin cut him off. Pike was quite helpful after our discussion. Seems he's wanted in Texas himself, made him talkative. Ruby moved away from McCoy, joining Ezekiel and the others. Is it true? All of it, the investors, the development plans, it was all a swindle. I prefer to think of it as creative acquisition, McCoy replied, his charming facade crumbling. The plans were real enough. This backward town is sitting on a gold mine with its springs. I simply accelerated the inevitable. By stealing people's property through forged documents, Quentin said. That's enough for territorial prison, McCoy. McCoy assessed the room, clearly calculating his options. His man Delaney looked increasingly nervous as more townsfolk gathered outside the windows, drawn by the commotion. This changes nothing, McCoy said finally. You have no authority here, Forrester. The sheriff is drunk in his office, Harvey the blacksmith interrupted, and likely to stay that way till morning. By then, we'll have sorted this out ourselves. McCoy's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. Finding none, he attempted one last bluff. The Kansas authorities will still be interested in your activities after Tascosa, Forrester. You can't touch me without exposing yourself. Quentin moved closer, his aim unwavering. Maybe so. But these people know the truth now, and unlike you, I'm not running from it anymore. For a long moment, tension filled the room. Then, with remarkable speed for a man of his bulk, Delaney flung a chair toward Quentin and bolted for the door. The distraction gave McCoy his opening. He overturned the table and drew a derringer from his vest pocket. Down. Quentin shouted, diving toward Ruby as McCoy fired. The bullet splintered the bar where Ruby had been standing seconds before. Townspeople scattered, some taking cover, others pursuing the fleeing Delaney. Quentin kept his body between Ruby and McCoy, who was now backing toward the door. This isn't over, Forrester, McCoy snarled, keeping the small but deadly derringer trained on them. I still have friends in places you can't touch. Maybe, Quentin acknowledged, but not in Eureka Springs. As McCoy reached the door, a shot rang out from outside. McCoy jerked, the derringer falling from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. In the doorway stood Dr. Miller, a hunting rifle in his hands. That's for threatening my wife and son. the doctor said calmly, "and for thinking this town would stand by while you stole its future." McCoy staggered, shock and pain contorting his features. Townspeople quickly surrounded him, relieving him of his weapons and securing his uninjured arm. "Get him to my office," Dr. Miller instructed. "I'll patch him up enough for the journey to Fort Smith." He looked at Quentin. "I assume that's where he's headed," Quentin nodded. "Judge Parker will want to hear about this operation. If McCoy's been pulling this scheme across the territories, he's facing serious time." As the impromptu posse led McCoy away, Ruby turned to Quentin. "You could have left. He gave you a clear path to ride out." "Wasn't much of a choice," Quentin replied. "Not after everything." Ruby studied him, a gentle smile forming. "Does this mean you're staying, at least until this is sorted out?" Quentin hesitated. The smart play was still to move on. McCoy hadn't been bluffing about his connections. There would be questions, investigations, possibly even the resurrection of the Jenkins shooting. Yet, for the first time in years, the thought of running held no appeal. Here in this room, surrounded by people who had stood together against intimidation, Quentin felt something he'd nearly forgotten, a sense of belonging. "I'll stay," he said finally. "At least until McCoy's been properly dealt with." Ruby's smile widened, warming him in ways he couldn't quite name. "Good, because I think Eureka Springs could use a man who remembers what justice looks like." The next few days were a flurry of activity as the full extent of McCoy's scheme came to light. Pike, facing charges in Texas, turned state's evidence, revealing that McCoy had successfully pulled similar land swindles in 3 other towns across Arkansas and Missouri. Sheriff Daniels, confronted with evidence of his complicity, resigned in disgrace. Collins, the telegraph operator, admitted to falsely claiming the lines were down on McCoy's orders. One by one, McCoy's web of lies unraveled. 4 days after McCoy's arrest, a contingent of deputy marshals arrived from Fort Smith to transport him and his accomplices to face Judge Parker's court. Their leader, a grizzled veteran named Hardin, recognized Quentin immediately. "Forrester," Hardin greeted him with a firm handshake. "Heard rumors you were up this way. Didn't expect to find you in the middle of taking down a land fraud operation." "Wasn't exactly planned," Quentin admitted as they watched McCoy and his men being loaded into a prison wagon. "Judge Parker asked me to give you this," Hardin said, handing over a sealed envelope. "Said it might clear up some misconceptions." Alone on the boardwalk outside the saloon, Quentin opened the letter. Judge Parker's precise handwriting filled the single page. "Forrester, news of your actions in Eureka Springs has reached me. Well done. Regarding the Jenkins matter in Dodge City, be advised that witnesses recanted their false statements 2 years ago. The shooting has been conclusively ruled justified. No charges stand against you. Your badge remains in my desk drawer, should you ever wish to reclaim it. The territories still need good men." Judge Isaac Parker Quentin read the letter twice, each time feeling another layer of weight lift from his shoulders. No charges, no need to run. The past wasn't erased, but at least part of his burden had been lifted. That evening, as he sat on the saloon's back porch watching the sunset paint the Ozark Hills, Ruby joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You're deep in thought," she observed, offering him a cup. "Thinking about the future," he admitted. "Been a while since I've done that." Ruby settled beside him on the bench. "And what does the future hold for Quentin Forrester?" He showed her Parker's letter. As she read it, her expression brightened. "This is wonderful news," she said. "Will you go back, become a marshal again?" Quentin considered the question. The badge had once defined him, given purpose to his days. But that was before Tascosa, before years of wandering had changed him. "Don't know," he answered honestly. "Not sure that's my path anymore." Ruby nodded, understanding in her eyes. What is your path, then? Quentin really looked at her. In the weeks since he'd ridden into Eureka Springs, Ruby Calloway had become more than just a woman he'd helped. She'd become a beacon, a steady light guiding him back to himself. Thought I might stay here a while, he said carefully. Town needs a new sheriff, might apply if the citizens would have me. Ruby's smile was like sunrise. I think they'd be fools to choose anyone else. And you? Quentin asked, suddenly uncertain. Would you want me to stay? Ruby set her cup aside and reached for his hand, her touch warm and sure. When you rode into town that day, I saw a man haunted by shadows. You've been running so long, Quentin. Maybe it's time to stand still, let the light find you. Quentin felt something shift inside him, a door long closed creaking open. I'm not an easy man to know, Ruby. The things I've seen, the things I've done, they don't just disappear. I don't want them to, she replied. They're part of who you are. She squeezed his hand gently. Remember what I said when you told me about your past. Then let me light the way. I meant it, Quentin. Some journeys aren't meant to be traveled alone. The simple truth of her words washed over him like cleansing rain. For so long, he'd believed his only options were to run from his past or be consumed by it. Ruby offered a third path: to acknowledge it, to carry it, but not to be defined by it. I'd like that, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. To stop running, to see where this path leads. Ruby's eyes shone in the fading light. Then that's what we'll do, together. As darkness settled over the hills, they remained on the porch, hand in hand, watching stars appear one by one in the vast Arkansas sky. For the first time in years, Quentin didn't feel the urge to check his back trail or plan his next move. Instead, he allowed himself to be present, to feel the warmth of Ruby's hand in his, to believe that perhaps his darkest days were behind him. In the weeks that followed, Eureka Springs began to heal from McCoy's schemes. Property deeds were restored to rightful owners, and with the telegraph lines truly repaired, communication with the outside world resumed. The town council, impressed by Quentin's role in exposing the fraud, offered him the position of sheriff, which he accepted after some consideration. Ruby's saloon thrived, as summer brought visitors drawn by the spring's reputed healing properties. Together with Ezekiel, she expanded the Red Mountains offerings to include proper meals and additional rooms for travelers. Their partnership extended to town affairs as well, with Ruby serving on the newly formed Commerce Committee that sought legitimate, community-focused development of the Springs. Quentin settled into his role as sheriff with a quiet dignity that earned him respect throughout the county. His evenings, however, increasingly belonged to Ruby. They would often walk the winding streets of Eureka Springs after the saloon closed, talking of the day's events and gradually sharing the stories that had shaped them. On a warm evening in late August, nearly 3 months after Quentin had ridden into town, they climbed to a lookout point above Eureka Springs. The town spread below them, lamplight glowing in windows, the surrounding hills dark velvet against the star-strewn sky. I used to dream of cities, Ruby admitted as they sat on a weathered bench. St. Louis, Chicago, places with theaters and grand buildings. I thought that's where life happened. And now, Quentin asked. She gestured to the town below. Now I see that life happens wherever you choose to live it fully. My parents understood that. They could have gone anywhere after the war, but they chose to build something here. Quentin nodded. They built more than a saloon. They built community. Yes, Ruby agreed softly. That's what matters in the end, isn't it? Not just surviving, but creating something that lasts, that makes life better for others. Her words resonated deeply with Quentin. For years, he'd focused solely on survival, on outrunning his past. The idea of building, of creating rather than merely enduring, stirred something profound within him. "Ruby," he said, taking her hand, "I've been thinking about the future, our future." Her eyes widened slightly. "Have you now, Sheriff Forrester?" "I have," he confirmed, suddenly nervous despite facing down armed men without flinching. "I'm not a man of flowery words or grand gestures, but I know that meeting you changed everything for me. You saw light in me when I could only see darkness." Ruby's hand tightened around his. "That light was always there, Quentin. You just needed someone to remind you of it." Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. In the moonlight, the simple gold band gleamed. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Only thing I have left of her. I've carried it all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to give it to anyone." He met Ruby's gaze, allowing her to see everything in his heart. "I love you, Ruby Calloway. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Ruby's eyes filled with tears that caught the moonlight like diamonds. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Quentin Forrester, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Quentin felt the last shadows of his past recede. There would always be dark days, life ensured that, but no longer would he face them alone. Ruby had promised to light his way, and in return, he would spend the rest of his days ensuring that light never dimmed. They were married that autumn, as golden leaves drifted from the Ozark maples, and the clear mountain air carried the first hint of winter. The entire town turned out for the celebration, held in the square outside the Red Mountain. Judge Parker himself traveled from Fort Smith to perform the ceremony, bringing with him news that McCoy had been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for his crimes. As Quentin and Ruby spoke their vows beneath an arch woven with late-blooming wildflowers, the gathered townsfolk saw not just the union of two people, but the symbolic healing of their community. The man who had arrived as a stranger with haunted eyes now stood tall as their sheriff, his face transformed by love and purpose. The woman who had defied intimidation to protect her heritage now radiated joy, her strength matched perfectly by her compassion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared. "May your days be long and filled with light." As Quentin kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the crowd. Ezekiel wiped tears unashamedly while Dr. Miller and his wife Sarah stood nearby, their infant son sleeping peacefully in her arms. Harvey the blacksmith had composed a song for the occasion, which he performed with surprising tenderness on a battered guitar. The celebration continued well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the couple who had helped save Eureka Springs from McCoy's schemes. When they finally slipped away to the small house Quentin had purchased at the edge of town, they stood for a moment on the porch, looking at the stars. "Happy?" Quentin asked, his arm around Ruby's waist. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied, leaning into him. "And you? Any regrets about staying?" Quentin thought of the years he'd spent running, the nameless towns, the solitary trails, the weight of memories he'd carried alone. Then he looked at Ruby, at the home they would share, at the future stretching before them like an open road. "Not a single one," he said truthfully. "You were right that first night, Ruby. You said then, 'Let me light the way,' and you have, in more ways than you know." Ruby reached up to touch the scar on his jaw, a tender gesture that acknowledged his past while celebrating their present. "We'll light each other's way, Quentin. That's what it means to build a life together." As they crossed the threshold into their home, Quentin Forrester, once a lawman, once a fugitive, now simply a man who had found his place in the world, knew with absolute certainty that his darkest days were behind him. The future, illuminated by Ruby's love, stretched bright before them both. 5 years later, Quentin stood on that same porch, watching Ruby in the garden with their 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. The little girl's laughter rang out as she helped her mother gather vegetables, her dark curls and blue eyes a perfect blend of her parents' features. Eureka Springs had grown considerably in those 5 years, becoming known throughout the region for its healing springs and picturesque setting. Visitors came from as far as New Orleans and Chicago, staying in the new hotel built where McCoy had once envisioned his gambling palace. Unlike McCoy's scheme, however, the town's growth had been careful and community-driven, preserving its character while embracing progress. The Red Mountain Saloon, now managed primarily by Ezekiel, while Ruby devoted time to motherhood and civic leadership, had evolved into a respectable establishment featuring regular musical performances and the finest dining in the county. Quentin still served as sheriff, though these days his duties involved more settling minor disputes and helping lost tourists than confronting dangerous outlaws. As Elizabeth broke away from Ruby to run toward him, arms outstretched, Quentin swept his daughter up into a hug, marveling at how someone so small could hold such an enormous place in his heart. "Papa, Mama's growing pumpkins big as houses," the little girl exclaimed, her imagination as vibrant as her mother's spirit. "Is that so?" Quentin replied seriously. "Well, we'll need a mighty big pie plate then, won't we?" Ruby approached, wiping garden soil from her hands. Even after years of marriage, the sight of her still caused Quentin's heart to quicken. She had grown more beautiful to him with each passing day, each shared joy and sorrow deepening his love for her. "Sheriff Forrester," she greeted him with a smile that belonged only to him. "Home early today." "Thought I'd surprise my girls," he said, leaning down to kiss her while still holding Elizabeth. "Town's quiet. Thought we might ride up to the lookout point, have that picnic we've been talking about." Ruby's smile widened. "That sounds perfect. I have news I'd like to share with you anyway." "News that might make Elizabeth very happy." Quentin raised an eyebrow, understanding immediately. "Are you certain?" Ruby nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. Early spring, he thinks." Joy washed over Quentin like a wave. Another child. Another blessing he'd never imagined possible during those dark years of wandering. "Hear that, little one?" he said to Elizabeth. "You might have a brother or sister soon." Elizabeth's eyes widened with excitement, though she clearly didn't fully grasp the concept. "Can I teach them to ride horses?" "When they're big enough," Ruby promised, "just like Papa taught you." Later, as they sat at the lookout point, the same place where Quentin had proposed, watching Elizabeth chase butterflies in the late afternoon sunshine, Ruby leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked quietly. "That day you rode into town, could you have pictured this life?" Quentin watched his daughter, her face alight with joy and discovery, then looked at his wife, her beauty enhanced by the golden light and the love shining in her eyes. He thought of the home they'd built, the community they'd helped strengthen, the family that was growing. He remembered the man he'd been haunted, solitary, convinced that redemption lay forever beyond his reach. "Never," he admitted. "I couldn't have imagined any of this. I didn't believe such happiness was possible for a man with my past." Ruby took his hand, her touch as reassuring now as it had been that night in the saloon when he'd finally shared the burden he'd carried alone for so long. "The past shapes us," she said, echoing words she'd spoken years before. "But it's the choices we make today that define who we are." Quentin squeezed her hand gently. "You know what still amazes me? That you saw something worth saving in a broken man with too many regrets." Ruby's smile was tender as she placed his hand over her belly, where their second child grew. "I saw a good man trying to outrun shadows. All I did was offer a little light." as the sun began its descent toward the distant horizon, painting the Ozark Hills in shades of gold and amber. Quentin Forrester, once a cowboy with a past too dark to tell, held his family close and thanked whatever fate or providence had led him to Eureka Springs, and to the woman who had indeed lit his way home.